So here's an oldie goldie. It's a '89 Chevy Cheyenne, four-wheel drive. It's being used as a snowplow. It's not currently registered to run on the road. It was towed here or brought here yesterday or a day before yesterday for a problem where after it runs for a while it quits and it won't restart until you let it cool off. So I left it sitting outside, tried to bring it in yesterday, and it was about -10 and it wouldn't fire at all and it cranked. Visual inspection, and I see this coolant temp sensor is unplugged. Well, on these old girls there was only the coolant temp sensor, so the default strategy was such that if the temp sensor was out of range, which it certainly would be right now, the only thing it could do is substitute an average warm engine value. And of course, if it's -10 and it's substituted 80 degrees Celsius temperature, it's not going to start because it'll have insufficient fuel. So I'm going to put the scanner on it. This requires the GM1 adapter and power from the cigarette lighter, OBD2 adapter, so we can use the new school scan tool on the old school system. So we'll have a look at some data before we start this vehicle. So these old systems were very basic. There wasn't a lot to choose from, engine and ABS. Anyways, it does an automatic ID, obviously. Let's see if there's any codes. Should be a current code for the coolant temp sensor. It won't be a 5-digit code. It's a code 15, which would be a P0115, I believe, now, today. Of course, that's a current fault code. Display data, of course, under data list here it should show about 10 data parameters, because that's realistically all there was. That's the entire data list. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, okay, 22. And of course coolant temperature stands out here at -40. So let's plug that sensor in and see what it reads. I'm just gonna put some dielectric grease on it and plug it in. So that's interesting. With the sensor plugged in, it still shows -40. Let's look at the other data parameters here to see if there's anything else that's right. Map sensor 28.6. Map sensor voltage looks realistic, 4.7 volts. TPS looks good. Integrator is the same as short-term fuel trim. And block learn is the same as long-term fuel trim. Those don't come active until it starts. So realistically, there's not much here. But I've got the coolant temp sensor plugged in and it still shows -40. So let's have a look at that 5-volt reference and try another sensor. It looks like a fairly new sensor in there. So I grabbed another used temp sensor out of my cupboard. It's actually a newer model, one for a newer truck because it hasn't got pipe threads on it. And it shows 21 Celsius, which is the room temperature in shop here, which makes sense. I would suspect it would start and run pretty good at this temperature. Let's give it a try. Well, it doesn't get any nicer than that, so we'll get a coolant temp sensor and install it. I suspect that that new sensor failed. It was indicating a false cold condition, and it was overfueling when it was hot. So we'll have a look at oxygen sensor operation on this thing. Temperature sensor. Boy, that was pretty simple stuff. One oxygen sensor in front of the cat. Actually, one oxygen sensor on the left exhaust manifold. That's close enough. The right side's probably doing the same thing. And it'll be in open loop for some time. So let this run for a while and see if it gives us a problem. So it's been running now for about 15 minutes. I just held it at fast idle for a good minute and a half. Had it up to about 2300 RPM, and I still can't get it to go into closed loop. Mind you, it's only at 74. Should run about 90. But I would expect it to have gone in closed loop by now. Could be that this O2 sensor is dead. GM does put a bias voltage of about 450 millivolts on the sensor. But I would expect that at 75 degrees Celsius, 76 now, it should have gone to closed loop by now. If I shoot the temperature of the thermostat with an infrared camera, it's a little hotter than that. So that used temp sensor may be skewed slightly off by about 10 degrees, but I think it's still hot enough. It should be in closed loop. We'll let it run for a few more seconds and see what happens. So even after an extended fast idle, it hasn't gone to closed loop, but I see it has a fault code now, so I'm going to save this recording. And we're going to go back and look and see what fault code it's got. Check engine light is currently on. I suspect insufficient oxygen sensor performance, or maybe the fault code is because I had the temp sensor disconnected. O2 sensor circuit open, short, or bad. I like that, or bad. Well, we're going to replace the coolant temp sensor and the oxygen sensor in this thing, and then see how it works tomorrow. Well, I did a visual inspection of the oxygen sensor and it's unplugged. So I plugged it back in. I'm going to clear the codes. Oh, I think I read that. I think it said, yes, watch what happens when you click clear codes. It says, to clear codes, disconnect the negative battery cable. Oh my goodness, I forgot all about this old shit. Okay, so disconnecting the battery cleared the codes. Let's go back in and look at engine data now and see if it'll go into closed loop now. It's already been running for about 60 seconds. Okay, so it's an open loop. And the O2 sensor voltage is actually working now. It's at 82 Celsius, so it should be hot enough to go into closed loop. But it probably takes a minute or so of running before it'll make a decision. We got the oxygen sensor was unplugged. See, the coolant temperature is dropping now because I had it sitting, so it went through a hot soak. I'm going to rev it up. What was the integrator doing during that time? It did go to closed loop. Oxygen sensor is not switching all that great, but this 128 is equivalent to 0% correction. Numbers lower than 128 are a reduction in fuel. Numbers greater than 128 are adding fuel, and that's integrator. That's the same as short-term fuel trim. And block learn is equivalent to long-term fuel trim. I see it subtracting right now. The O2 sensor seems to be switching okay from about 100 millivolts to 800 millivolts. This was about as good as they ran back in the day. So I don't think it needs an oxygen sensor, it just needs to be plugged in. Imagine that.